This video is about how cells create more cells. Well, why do cells need to divide or create more cells? There are three main reasons. The first is for reproduction, to create a new organism, to create a baby. How does a species survive in the environment? Well, it has babies, and lots of babies are a result of reproduction. There are two types of reproduction, asexual and sexual, and we'll talk about these on the next slide. Another reason why cells need to divide is simply to grow. You all started the size of that little dot right there. That is the size of when a sperm and an egg come together and form a zygote. That's the size of a zygote. You all started that size. And now you're 100 trillion cells. How do you get from one cell to 100 trillion cells? Through growth, through cell division. The final reason why cells need to divide is to replace or repair cells. Look at that little salamander. If their tail falls off, they grow a new tail. Think about when you get cut. If you have a cut, your cells repair itself. There are all kinds of organisms that can actually grow whole new limbs, whole new appendages. Cells need to divide so that you can replace and repair cells. Reproduction is one reason why cells need to divide. You need to create new organisms. Asexual reproduction is when a single parent simply divides in half and creates a new organism. The offspring of asexual reproduction are genetically identical to the parents, which means they have the exact same DNA. They are essentially identical twins. Examples of organisms that use asexual reproduction would be really small things, prokaryotes like bacteria and also amoeba. Sexual reproduction is what we do. All animals and plants go through sexual reproduction. That's how we create a baby. We simply don't just divide in half like bacteria or amoeba do. We actually need two parents. We need sperm and we need egg. They come together to form a baby. This is sexual reproduction. The offspring of sexual reproduction are genetically different from their parents. They have different DNA. Think about yourself. Are you an identical twin with your mom? Are you an identical twin with your dad? No, you do not go through asexual reproduction. You go through sexual reproduction. Your DNA is different than your mom's, different from your dad, and also different from all your siblings. Examples of organisms that go through sexual reproduction are humans and plants. Really, all animals, all plants, pretty much everything that you see out in your environment goes through sexual reproduction. Before a cell can divide, it needs to package up its DNA. DNA is really long and usually all tangled up like string. But if you need to make new cells, you need to neatly organize the DNA so that it can easily be passed from one cell to the next. When DNA is tightly packed together, usually it's just coiled around itself so it makes a nice little tight package, it's called a chromosome. If you look at the picture below, this is what DNA normally looks like. It's all coiled up, it looks like tangled up string. But when the cell gets ready to divide, it coils around itself really tight so it's nice and organized, so it's easy to move from one side of the cell to the other side of the cell when it gets ready for cell division. This is a picture of actual chromosomes, so again, tightly coiled DNA in a cell. Remember, this is just DNA, it's just DNA tightly coiled around and around, and it just happens to look like these little X's. This is all coiled up DNA. Alright, so how does a cell actually divide? Well, like you and me, it has a life cycle. We just happen to call it a cell cycle. The sequence of events from the time a cell is first formed until it divides. The cell spends most of its life in a stage called interphase. Interphase is like your childhood. You pretty much just hung around your house and grew. This is what our cells do during interphase. The first step of interphase is called G1 phase. So notice in the cell cycle up here, the very first step right here, it's in green, so it's interphase, is G1, cell growth. There's our cell, it's getting bigger and bigger, cell growth. Second step is called S phase. This is where the DNA is copied, where you actually double the DNA. If that's our cell, during S phase, there it goes, our DNA has been doubled. Here's a picture of S phase below. Let's pretend we have one chromosome. After S phase, we have two chromosomes. Our DNA was copied. We doubled our DNA. The third stage of interphase is the G2 phase. The cell just continues to grow and grow. So again, we're just talking about interphase, which is like your childhood. You grow a lot, You copy your DNA and you grow some more. Eventually, we have to divide the cell, which is called mitosis, which is the next section. This is mitosis. Mitosis simply describes how cells actually divide. We talked about interphase G1, S, and G2. Now, how does a cell actually create another cell? Mitosis is a process of creating genetically identical cells. Look at the cell cycle up here. We did G1, S, G2. Now we're talking about how the cell actually divides in half to make two cells. This is what it looks like. Here's a cell. A cell is going to divide in half, and now we have two cells. That's mitosis. That's the process of creating genetically identical cells. In humans, it's the same. We just happen to have 46 strands of DNA, and when it's ready for mitosis, we call it 46 chromosomes because the DNA is just coiled up really tightly. So if we have 46 chromosomes in our cell, after mitosis, we will have two cells with 46 chromosomes because mitosis makes identical cells. The purpose of mitosis is for asexual reproduction. Remember, asexual reproduction is simply creating a genetically identical offspring. Mitosis is the one that does that. It's also involved in growth. You all started that size of that little dot, and now you're maybe 6 feet tall. How did you do that? Well, your cells divided over and over and over times 1 trillion times, and now you have 100 trillion cells in your body. How did you get 100 trillion cells? Mitosis. Finally, mitosis is also used to replace and repair cells. If you cut yourself and your wound needs to heal, mitosis occurs. The cells in the area where the cut was are going to start dividing over and over and over again so it can repair that cut. What kind of cells go through mitosis? Well, the answer is all cells. Every single cell in this world goes through mitosis, with one exception: cells that are called gametes, which are sperm and egg cells. You will learn about these cells in the next video. So generally speaking, pretty much every single cell on Earth goes through mitosis, creates identical cells. This is kind of what mitosis looks like. Notice you start with one cell. Eventually that one cell is going to divide in half to two cells. Those two cells each are going to divide in half to 4 cells. These 4 cells will divide into 8 cells, and on and on and on. That's how you became a human. You started as one cell. A sperm and an egg came together to form one cell. Then you divide it in half, divide it in half, divide it in half, over and over and over again until you have 100 trillion cells. This is an animated version of how mitosis happens. I know it's going really fast, but just watch it 1,000 times. Notice the DNA first lines up in the middle and is then pulled apart to opposite sides of the cell. Then the cell splits in half and you have 2 cells. People tend to get really confused here because I keep saying the word half, like the cells split in half. But I thought mitosis was making identical cells with identical DNA, not half of the DNA. Well, you're right. Do you remember right before mitosis, in S phase of interphase, the cell's DNA doubled? It replicated? Well, that's what's happening here. The cells temporarily have double the amount of DNA. Then they split in half so that the new baby cells will actually have the same amount of DNA as the original parent cell. Here's another picture. This is showing you what actually happens in the cell. This is a cell going through mitosis. First off, we have the DNA in the center. It pulls apart to opposite sides. There we go. And then the cell will split in half. That was really fast. Let me show you a slower version of this animation. Okay, so here's a cell. This cell is in interphase, and the DNA is about to double. There it did. DNA is doubled. Now the DNA is going to line up in the middle of the cell. So this DNA we actually now call chromosomes because it's tightly coiled. Now the DNA or chromosomes are going to be pulled apart from each other. And eventually the cell is now going to split in half. So we have now, in a second actually, created identical cells because you doubled the DNA, then you pulled the DNA in half, and then you separate out the cells. That's mitosis, creating genetically identical cells. In summary, the cell cycle includes interphase, which has 3 steps: growing, DNA duplicating, and G2, which is cells getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That's interphase. Once the cell is really big, it now needs to divide in half, and that's the process of mitosis. DNA is now separated into 2 cells, and the end result is you create 2 genetically identical cells. The cell cycle will happen over and over and over again for the lifetime of the organism. Let's look at this DNA to review. The cell starts with one chromosome at the beginning of the cell cycle. Notice right here, this is a chromosome. This again is just really coiled DNA. We are at the beginning of the cell cycle, so we are at G1 of interphase when the cell is growing. Now during S phase, the DNA is going to duplicate. So in this picture, one chromosome is now going to become 2. And in my little picture, I've now just doubled the DNA. Then it's going to go through G2 of interphase, which is not shown in this picture, but eventually it will go through mitosis, which means you separate out the DNA again. So one's going to go to one cell, one's going to go to the other cell, and now we have 2 identical cells. Notice the original cell is now identical to the 2 daughter cells, or 2 baby cells at the end. We have created genetically identical cells. Let's apply this to humans. Remember, humans have 46 strands of DNA in each one of our cells, so we'll just call them 46 chromosomes. In G1 phase of interphase, the cell gets bigger. In S phase of interphase, the cell doubles its DNA, so we go from 46 to 92. During mitosis, the cell is actually going to split that number in half. So we are now back to 46 chromosomes in each one of our cells. Look at the parent cell, 46. Look at the baby cells, 46. We have created genetically identical cells. Start with 46, end with 46. This question, even though it's really simple, pops up all the time on the MCAS. If you start with a cell that has 10 chromosomes, and after mitosis, how many chromosomes will be in each cell? Well, you know that mitosis creates genetically identical cells. So if you start with 10, you end with 10. How about if you start with 24? How many chromosomes will be in each cell after mitosis? Identical, 24. Start with 88. How many chromosomes will be in each cell at the end of mitosis? 88 in each cell. If you were to remember one thing and one thing only, I hope it's not one thing, but let's pretend it's one thing. The one thing that you should remember is mitosis creates genetically identical cells. Write down your questions and ask me in class.